to present. I will very briefly introduce myself. By the way, I was already in touch with Association of Azerbaijani Banks beginning of the year, where there was a virtual fair, and I attended that fair as well, as a visitor though. Perhaps I've been speaking to one or the other attendee of this meeting as well. Today is about information security, but before I get into this, I will tell a very few words about myself and Neurotech, so that you understand a little bit the context better. I am myself Belgian, actually, from Belgium in Europe, but with German roots. And so I am, in that sense, a European. But I do live for more than 14 years in Turkey. And I have been doing a lot of business here in Turkey in the IT sector as a consultant in Turkey and by the way, as well abroad. And I have been also on some projects at some point in time, about 10 years ago in Azerbaijan, where I was with Azercell, just FYI. So it's not a country that is completely unknown to me. Of course, because I've had my projects there as well, but also because Turkey and Azerbaijan are anyway very close to each other. So as I have been spending time in Turkey, I realized there's a lot of very clever, very ingenious solutions and vendors that have been active here. And actually, yes. Sorry, please, I couldn't hear. I continue? I will continue. I couldn't hear the question. I have been in Turkey for 14 years, and I have been experiencing a collaboration with a lot of very good vendors, very clever vendors here in the country who have engineered very good solutions, which are very successful here in Turkey already. So the idea of Neurotech, which is to what I call the best of breed vendors and the best of breed solutions from Turkey, from Turkish vendors, actually not only from Turkey, there are some other ones from also non-Turkish vendors, but majority is Turkish, and promote them to international markets. Why? Because those vendors are very good at what they are doing. They have very successful products, very successful solutions. They are very good system integrators. They are very expert in their domain. And they came up with products that are actually competing with global brands. And as they are competing with global brands, they are actually not only equal in terms of capabilities and performance, but they are also a lot more affordable. So as a whole, basically the idea of Neurotech is to promote alternative solutions of challengers to global brands, and basically give another perspective on the market to, let's say, countries or accounts, for instance, in this case in Azerbaijan, to make you aware that, that there are some challengers out there who can be very beneficial to you and who can provide solutions at very competitive conditions. So in short, the portfolio of the vendors that we are supporting and promoting is summarized in this slide. You see, in principle, we are addressing all the stakeholders in a large enterprise, and we have solutions for all kinds of services, especially also financial services, which is of particular interest for you. And as we are addressing all the stakeholders in the enterprise, we are, of course, having solutions that are infrastructure facing. And in particular, we have solutions in the area of GDPR management and governance and information security. The global brands that we are competing with are the ones that we have highlighted then further below. And if you are active in the area of information security, I'm very sure that you would be familiar with these names. And perhaps you have already engaged them. So the idea, the point of today's webinar is not to let's say, to make to make, let's say, publicity and advertisement for specific vendors, but to give you an idea about what can be found in terms of solutions that could very well align into an IT roadmap and a solution stack that implement information security in your data center. And in the background of this information, the idea is to make you, to have you be aware that these solutions do not necessarily have to come from Gartner's Leaders Quadrant and global brands. They are alternatives to the global brands. They are alternatives to what is, let's say, promoted via Gartner and global consultancies. And these alternatives may be actually at your doorstep, you know, just here, right away across the border in Turkey. For instance, we do have such alternatives available to you, and very successful and very clever ones. Now, what is information security or data management and security? And what's the difference with GDPR? Because in my title of this webinar, we are making, let's say, an association between information security and GDPR. Actually, today's webinar is really about information security. Yes, please. Any question? So today's webinar is really about information security, but as you see with the graphic further below, there is an overlap between information security and GDPR. And that overlap is, let's say, a normal one, because a lot of the sensitive data that you have in your organization, especially banks being in the B2B market, B2C market, have customer information, and then the customer information may fall under the, let's say, regulatory scope of GDPR. Now, many countries have not yet implemented GDPR. In Turkey, actually, GDPR is implemented, but it comes under another acronym, which is KVKK. So in Turkey, GDPR is known as KVKK. But there are many other countries where GDPR is in the planning or has not yet been even talked about seriously. And therefore, I don't know the situation in Azerbaijan, but basically, this could be both a topic to address regulations that we are facing in the area of GDPR, or as well, general topics that you are, or concerns you have about information security in general, not necessarily related to the privacy data of your customers. In short, GDPR is about regulations that are directly concerned with the privacy of the data of individuals. As businesses have a relationship with individuals, businesses collect data about individuals, not only personal data about individuals like first name, last name, gender, address, and certain preferences, but also transactional data about individuals. In a bank, for instance, the number of transactions you make, the activity patterns of certain customers on their accounts, etc., the balances, etc. So it is personal information. It is transactional information or account information related to the individuals. All of this is private information, which the customers or the individuals, the private people, private citizens have a right to understand from every account, in this case banks, what is being done with this data, and prevent certain sharing of these data within the organization or with third parties. Information security is a little bit different. The focus is not on the individual customer and the privacy of these data. The focus here is on data that are sensitive to the business as a whole, which of course includes customer data, but of course also includes a lot of other data like B2B data. So this is not private data, it's business to business relationship data. Human resource data about your own stuff. Some KPIs, SLAs, whatever information that is being collected and maybe generated, calculated in the data warehouse. Any kind of commercial data, procurement data, contract data, reference data about, for instance, the list of your branches, their whereabouts, you know, their performance, etc. So there's a lot of information in businesses, such as banks, which are very sensitive to the way you are viewing your business, and they are very sensitive and very, let's say, private to the type of business and the way you are running your business. And they are sensitive without having to be necessarily related to your customer. So information security is about the superset of any kind of sensitive data. And it's not related necessarily with how you are dealing with specific rights of the customer. It is an internal need, and it's about understanding within your organization who is accessing what kind of data, when and how, and what kind of mechanisms of control do you have inside of your organization to limit access or to limit exposure of data to certain groups of people. So information security is, in that sense, including some parts of GDPR, but it's including a lot more than GDPR because it has a much wider data scope. And basically, as it has a much wider data scope, also requires different types of tool sets and solutions. And all of them need to build together in order to provide you end-to-end control about what's happening about your data. Then there's a third domain out there in every enterprise, of course, also in banks, which is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity also has a certain concern about data security. There are some standard solutions inside of cybersecurity, let's say, domain, which are dealing with data access. In particular, there is identity access management types of solutions, and there is privileged access management as well. Both of them, let's say, are solutions you would use in the cybersecurity area to control access to data by certain user groups. However, cybersecurity is more technology-centric and usually less data-centric. And this is important, cybersecurity is about defending your organization or your data center or your IT assets against malicious outsiders. So it implies you have a perimeter and that you are defending your perimeter versus external people and versus intentions of external people in trying to break into your organization. However, information security is not necessarily directed at third parties, external people. Actually, information security is mostly an internal matter. It's about regulating within your organization who has access to what data, why and how and when, and who is granting access to that data, and how you are, what are the mechanisms at your disposal to control this access, to be able to report on this, and to protect the sensitive parts of those data that you are exposing to them. So that's just to put information security in a particular, let's say, context. It's neither cybersecurity nor GDPR. It's something in between, and it's very much data-centric, but it's also very much, let's say, directed at your internal organizations and your internal ways of defining your data access policies and implementing those. And as such, actually, because we are talking about a space of solutions, the solutions that we will see later on, all of them, how to say, they are supporting an effort that organizations have in becoming compliant with a particular standard, which is a standard about information security, and this is the ISO 27001. So ISO 27001 is a certification that is not attached to a particular solution, but to which organizations are ISO compliant. But in order to be ISO compliant, they need to have implemented a certain number of processes and a certain number of solutions, which all of them contribute to the compliancy of that standard, and which is then being audited, and then about which you can get then the certification. So the solutions that we will see a little bit later in our in the following slides are not by themselves compliant with 27001. They are not implementing as by themselves 27001, but they are instrumental in helping organizations such as banks in becoming ISO 27001 compliant. So what we do have here basically is, I will not spend much time about this slide, but basically here we have a number of solutions which are relevant to an organization such as a bank in the area of cost cutting, because you are going to do a lot of expenditures about buying IT solutions, software products, B2B software solutions. They are very expensive, and therefore they are very expensive without having an obvious business benefit. Actually, what you are doing with this software is not increasing your business capabilities. You are reducing the risk actually of operations in your business, and the risk of data breach, or the risk of data leakage, and the risk in creating or having a reputational damage. So it's an investment for an intangible benefit, because the intangible benefit is actually the reduction in your risk of having a data breach in your data center. But the investment is nevertheless very significant. These solutions are very expensive. Let's say the business performance in that sense is not directly affected, but could be indirectly affected by means of being exposed to penalties or lawsuits in case of a data breach. Regulation-wise, I already mentioned there's a lot of regulations that are let's say touched by information security. We have, of course, GDPR, which in Germany is called DSGVO. In Turkey, it's called KVKK. There are a lot of acronyms in many different languages. And GDPR is the internationally known acronym, but they are all about the privacy of your customer data. But there are other standards that are also, let's say, touching the topic of also, for instance, I just have to mention PCI Dss. So this is for credit card transactions. Banking regulations, for instance, also most likely have an effect on information security in some ways as well. So there's a lot of regulations, a lot of overlapping regulations, some of them local, some of them international. All of them have an effect on information security, and because they're regulations, you are supposed to be compliant with them, and therefore there's a certain obligations. There's a certain obligation from you to do something about this. Yeah, so basically this is the let's say enterprise context of why information security is important, and why the selection of the products is important, and what is at stake. At stake is a lot of expenses, a lot of damage, a lot of penalties, possibly huge penalties that can be applied to your business, but also expenses in terms of license costs for products that are actually invisible to the business, but very important, and each of their own also very expensive. Now, typically in IT, so now in the next slides, I'm going to get closer and closer to, let's say, the IT world, and I believe most of the attendants in today's webinar are people from the IT side. So these are all expressions of frustrations by stakeholders in the IT world, which you may be very familiar with. And all of these expressions of frustrations or pain points are very common. I have experienced them myself. And if you can identify yourself or your work with any of these pain points, then we are right on top, hitting the bullseye with this webinar, because the subsequent solutions are directly addressing these kind of pain points. We don't have to read the details here. I have already shared the presentation deck with Tahmina and ABBA organization, and it can be shared with you offline. And of course, I'm available also for feedback from you. Now, these frustrations or the solution to these pain points, let's say, are projected in the data center in the following way. So we have production environment, we have test environment. This is a model of a data center. And within the data center, you have, of course, assets. You have a big data environment, NoSQL databases. You have the PCs of your employees. And then you have your core banking systems, structured environment, and test environments. And within this IT space, data center, you have multiple players. You have IT developers, of course. You have super users and administrators managing all of these assets. And then you have business users and business analysts who are interacting with the data, usually by means of business applications, but sometimes also eventually with direct access to data on physical level. And then you have, in the COVID time especially, you have situation where some people work from home, some people work on premise, and then you have, as usual, also external consultants, third-party vendors, people, temporarily joining your organization, but not really directly part of it. So we have to place our solutions, somehow distribute them in this environment. Now you see that these blue boxes are all white labeled. I'm not going to talk about a particular vendor here, but for every of these blue boxes, you have a solution. The solution can be a Turkish one of the type that we are supporting with Novotech, with local success stories, but it can also be a global vendor. So behind each of those boxes, you have alternatives from multiple vendors, including the global vendors. And you have, in principle, the ability, as you are listening to my IT roadmap, to make your choices about who can be your implementation partner and how you make your picks of the vendors. But what I am suggesting here is basically that these solutions, as you see them in this slide, are actually the necessary solutions for you to create a system of control and system of report for you to understand what is going on in your data center with regard to information security. Then you have on the upper right corner a little box which is in a different color, because, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, we are seeing GDPR as a regulation that is affecting information security without necessarily covering all the aspects of information security. And when it comes to GDPR, there's especially two sides to GDPR. One is protecting the privacy of the customer data in the data center area where we have the mainstream solutions like the blue boxes. But there's one part of GDPR as well, which is governance, responsiveness to regulator audits, and handling of the customer requests, the transactional part of GDPR. A customer can approach a bank and say, I would like to have all my personal data erased, or I would like to prevent any of my personal data to be used in any kind of marketing research and marketing campaign. So this is a transactional request that the customer can make towards a bank, and towards which the bank has to react by making sure that this request is being implemented inside of the IT systems. So GDPR has two sides. One is the transactional side. It's the process side. It is the customer-facing side. It's the ability to demonstrate compliance with the government bodies or the auditors. This part is not part of the information security suite that we are going to discuss a bit later. However, there are also solutions around that, just about the governance and the management specifically for GDPR. However, whenever it comes to the protection of the customer data inside of the data center, then we come into the mainstream activity, which is information security in its general sense. which of course includes as well the protection of sensitive data as customer data, since the customers are part of your business and the customer data are part of the sensitive data that you are supposed to protect, and therefore they are under the umbrella of information security as well. So I just have this upper left box here to make you aware that there are also solutions to manage GDPR and let's say compliance with GDPR regulations, specifically for that type of regulation. However, when it comes to information security as a whole, we have these 6 standard solutions here, which we will see a little bit more in the coming slide. So as we are going to the details of these solutions, I suggest another perspective of these individual building blocks, and it's this one here. So it's the same stack, with the exception that the A3 is eclipsed here, and also I eclipsed the GDPR governance part. So I focus on really only on 5 products here, on five building blocks. And you see the representation has changed. It's no longer individual boxes distributed around the data center. Now you see a layered approach. And that's because I believe information security is a matter of securing your data center layer by layer. So with every layer, you are adding a certain degree of control, or you are addressing a certain number of use cases relevant to information security, and that layer by layer are complementing your ability to have your data center secured from the perspective of information security. The lowest layer in here is secure database transaction logging. So this is where to start eventually if you're considering a roadmap to implement. In fact, that's what I'm trying to help you understand, that information security is not a matter of a single solution. It's a combination of solutions. And for organizations that have not systematically addressed let's say the concerns they have about information security, it's very good to take a step back and look at it from a layered approach and look at this, let's say, proposition here as an IT strategy or an IT roadmap. So you can as well listen to my words and basically think of it not only as a number of individual solutions, but actually as an IT roadmap or IT strategy, specifically for implementing, let's say, a number of solutions in the area of information security. The lowest in the first place to start in your data center is around your databases. So what's happening in the database? You have a database, possibly a very complex one, in your core banking system, for instance. And that database is being hit by many different actors. They are, of course, developers, working on changes on that database, on the application, with side effects on the data model. They are business analysts making queries on the database. They are business users, of course, using the business applications, and through the business applications, there are transactions hitting the database. There's ETL tools taking extraction of data from the database to put them into the BI domain. There is, of course, also, and this is very important, there are database administrators. And all of these different actors, and I'm not now specifically talking about the core banking system, it can be any database in your banking environment. For instance, also a database in your BI domain, for instance, in your data warehouse, or your ERP solutions, HR systems, etc. So any kind of system you have in your data center, whether on the transactional side for your core business, or on the BI side for analytics and data warehousing, there are databases out there, and these databases are being hit by queries, and these queries come from many different actors in your organization. There are regulations, the same regulations or similar regulations exist in Azerbaijan as well. In Turkey, definitely they exist, that require a bank to be able to produce a report that guarantees that it captures all the transactions about a particular database object or all transactions of a certain type, regardless of who has posted that transaction, regardless of the channel through which that transaction has been reaching the database, and regardless of the privilege of the actor. So regardless of whether you are a standard database user or whether you are, in fact, a database administrator with super user privileges. So, so it's perhaps easy to think of, but if you think that the database has many possible entry points, business applications, direct queries from SQL editors, direct logins from database administrators, it's very difficult to have a unified picture of what is going on database levels. Of course, you have the database logs, but the database logs have an issue. One is that if you switch on detailed logging, the database performance goes down very much, and the performance then and the user experience is negative, which is Oracle solutions. Oracle has a solution here which is called Oracle Data Vault, but it requires detailed logging to be switched on. And therefore, it is a solution that is not preferred because of its impact on performance. So you can switch on the logs, but there are negative side effects. And second, the logs are being switched on by the database administrators. But the database administrators are one of the actors that are part of the auditing as well. They should be also part of those people reported on to supply the report to the regulator or to whoever is requesting it in the internal audit. So it's because of the requirement of separation of duty, it should not be a solution. It should not be a solution that that is basically owned by a certain group of people, in this case, database administrators, and at the same time, the solution is auditing the activities of those same people. There's a conflict of interest. So, in other words, the secure database transaction logging is a solution that should be independent of what database administrators are doing or can be doing. And it should be a solution that is not affecting the performance of a database. And because of this requirement, we are getting into technological, non-functional requirements that are not so trivial anymore. Why also a data of such regulatory requirement is because database administrators can possibly do certain transactions more or less undetected. If there was a particular reason, database administrators can, for instance, erase any trace of their transaction because they have, for instance, access to the root directory, and because they have a root password, they can tamper with log files, for instance. So that implies a certain malicious intent. But the point of the regulations is precisely that. It's to have reports that guarantee 100% that all the transactions are being logged, regardless of the privilege of the actor, safe from any tampering and safe from any hacker type of activities, and therefore provide a complete and complete and true picture of what is really going on database level. So they are on that level already. Very few international vendors that have a solution there. One of them is IBM Guardium. And IBM Guardium is the king of the hill, let's say, for this requirement. You may have known about this. It's a very famous vendor, a very famous solution in the area of secure database logging, but it is extremely expensive and it's a subscription-based product. So it's a very painful requirement from regulators towards banks to have this requirement implemented and to be able to produce these kind of reports. So what this solution is doing is basically the same than what IBM Guardium is providing, which is capturing and intercepting all the requests that are hitting a database and turning it into putting it into a safe place, safe from editing, encrypted and provides the ability to develop reports on top of that that can be extracted and sent to regulators, for instance. So secure database transaction log, especially for regulated industries, is a painful but necessary solution that is required mostly by regulators, but also by internal auditors. The second level up is a solution that is about test data management. I'm now on the second level in my layered approach, and the second level on the layered approach on the right side is the test data management system. Now you must have been in the situation as IT professional, whenever it comes to test data generation, you may have a case that there's a project. The project is reaching a test stage. So people from the project are going to the DBA of the production environment and say, look, we need to have production-like data. Can you please give us an extraction of your data so that we can do data testing on clean data? The DBA would say, no, it's not possible. I'm busy now. The data are the DBs are in business critical mode. Please come back over the weekend. And then eventually, when people start getting organized about the extraction of these data, you would have the next challenge, which is that your target test environment is too small because it's not sized like production. So you would have to start taking subsets of the data from production. You would take subsets of the customer or the account, some of their contact history, some of their transactional data, some of the payment history, some of the call detail history, call center, service requests, whatever, transactional data associated with these accounts. And as you do, you may even eliminate some of the tables which are not perhaps in your testing scope. So as you are taking subsets of the data, eventually that are fitting your target environment capacity, you would realize after lots of huffing and puffing and extraction of tables and copying and reloading that you have all of these data in your test environment, but they don't match. You have your account data, but the account data have no matching contact history, contact details. You have only partially matching transactional data, etc. So you figure out that the data that you got out of your production environment actually looks like it is production data, but it is logically inconsistent. So what you do then is you spend a lot of additional effort in trying to figure out which records out there are consistent. And whenever you find them, within a few days, they are already corrupted because other people are using the same test data and you cannot use them for your own purposes anymore. And then you are back to square one. So what this solution is doing is, rather than taking a table-centric approach, where you go table for table and extract the data of those tables or subsets of those data or sub-partitions, you take a record-centric. So you are not taking tables for tables. You are starting your journey with a master record, which is, for instance, the account. And then the tool navigates through the relationship tree in the relational data model and figures out the account has a relationship with contact details, contact history, transactional records, service request, portfolio details, etc. So as you are extracting, as you are focusing on a particular account, it will extract like a grape. Like a wine grape, all the related records related to that master account through the relational connections between the tables. It can be explicit physical keys connections, or it can be logical keys. You can configure this. So it means that whatever you are extracting out of the source systems and whatever you are putting into the target system is always logically correct, logically consistent. you don't have the situation that you have non-matching records, because you are utilizing an extraction logic that is leveraging the relationship between the tables, and then you can start your extraction process from a given master table, and the system pulls out all the related records from its relationship tree. So not only you are then putting information into your target system that is logically consistent, but you can manage your scope. You can define which tables exactly you are interested in, and whatever your data, the data that you are extracting is logically consistent, but also you manage the volume of the data of your extraction. You can take one record, or you can take 50 records, or 100 records, or 500,000, depending on the capacity of your target system, or depending on your test purpose. If it's a very light unit test, you need less data than if it was for user acceptance test. If it's for a standard sprint test in an agile organization, you need less data than if you had a release level test. So you can define, configure the scope of the data that you're interested in, and you can configure the volume of the data that you're interested in. And the volume of the data can be, for instance, by a range of account, or by a list of account, or by a random selection. It's all up to your preferences and configuration. Now you understood this tool can do whatever copying of data from whatever source to whatever target. So as such, it's not limited to the use cases of test data management. It can support use cases. For instance, migration to cloud, or data migration as a whole. It can migrate from any system from any source system to any target system, even possibly across a different technology platforms. So let's say from Oracle to Hive, from Hive to Teradata, from Teradata to SQL Server, etc. So the tool, as it is migrating or copying data, possibly even across technology platforms, would take care of automatically converting certain data types so that your data remains consistent and let's say meaningful from a business perspective. So I mentioned any kind of migration, including migration to cloud, any kind of particular operational need, test data management, of course, as well, but also purging and archiving. You can extract data from the source system and put them to a safe place for archiving purposes, and at the same time purge them from your source records, which is by the way also a requirement that is typically a GDPR requirement. Some customers are requiring your data to be purged, or some regulations may force you to purge data after, for instance, maybe 10 years of inactivity or 5 years, or you have an interest in keeping your data, your production environment clean and do regularly purging. So this tool can do any kind of operations and extracting data consistently and putting them into a target environment consistently, all configuration driven. Now, what is the part related to information security here on top? This is a cherry on the cake. Not only it is extracting data and putting them into another environment or purging it from the source as it is putting it into another environment, but also as it is doing this, it is applying certain policies that are actually resulting in some of the data being masked. Why? Because you may, for instance, take production data, which is of course sensitive information, and put them into a test environment where you have people doing development and testing which are not eligible to see production information in plain, or because you are exposing it to third-party consultancies or system integrators who are not even part of your organization and to whom you should protect your data, towards whom you should protect the data even more. So as you are copying the data on the fly, you would, as it is being replicated, you would apply data masking, and thereby take care of your information security policies and make sure that whatever you consider to be sensitive in there is sufficiently masked so that you are compliant with your internal policies or general regulations. The data masking algorithm themselves can be many different ones. It can be scrambling data. It can be a full masking, partial masking, left-hand masking, right-hand masking, different patterns of masking on whatever account numbers or telephone numbers or names or you name it, one-way masking, two-way masking, etc. So it's a very sophisticated and very rich, let's say, choice of data masking algorithms that you can apply depending on your requirements. But as the end result, you have the ability with this tool of sharing data that is otherwise highly sensitive from particular environments, in particular from production, into other environments, including possibly into the cloud. And as you are sharing these data, you're addressing your concerns about making sure that the sensitive part of those data is being basically taken care of, and that you are compliant with your policies by means of data masking. Now, on the left side of this tool, we have another tool, and it is again about data masking, but this time it is not data masking as you are copying data from one environment to the other. It is data masking on the fly as you are querying data from a particular database. For instance, one of you is working in IT operations, and you are senior manager and high security clearance levels. As you are senior manager and as you have a high level of security clearance, if you post a query to the database, possibly you would see the results of that query returned to you completely plain. Nothing of it is masked. But if I am, let's say, as a third-party contractor or whatever, a standard developer or business analyst, if I am making the same query to the same database, exactly the same query, to me, the results will be masked. Why? Because I don't have the same security clearance. So the tool, when it says dynamic data masking, the dynamic part means two things. One, it is dynamically applying to any kind of query that you are posting to a particular database, no matter how complex the query is, no matter which table you are accessing. In principle, the query will be analyzed, and the result of that query will be analyzed, and the results of that query, data masking will be applied according to certain business rules. So the dynamic side is like it applies to any kind of query posted to a particular database. The other part of dynamic, the word dynamic, is that it's adaptable to the person posting that query. As I mentioned before, depending on the role of the person in the organization, you can apply certain business rules that enforce a certain degree of data masking, or doesn't apply any kind of data masking because these rules conclude in a certain outcome that is not triggering any masking. So the role of the person that is posting the query is very critical here, because therefore business rules are being triggered, and those business rules determine whether for that particular role some data have to be masked, and which data have to be masked. And as it goes, it's not only dependent on the role, but it's also can take other parameters into the context of the query masking, which is, for instance, the time of the query. Are you posting your query within working hours or outside of working hours? Or are you working from home, or are you working on premise? Or are you using an SQL editor to post your query, or is the query coming from a business application? All of these are contextual parameters that are being evaluated by the tool and can decide to apply data masking on the fly as the data is being retrieved, or not do it. For instance, you could have a business application hitting the database with a particular query, And the tool decides, okay, it is configured like that because maybe data masking is applied, is taken care of on application level, therefore on database level, you don't do anything. The database would return the query to the business application without any masking applied. However, if the query is being posted via an SQL editor, then you do apply data masking. Or you are in the BI domain and you have your data warehouse and you want to have data masking applied to people accessing the data warehouse database directly on physical level because they do ad hoc report. And therefore, anyone who is connecting directly for ad hoc reporting the database and does certain queries would not be able to see any of the information in plain, or some of the information in plain. So it would be masked to the people doing ad hoc reporting. If you are accessing the data via a reporting tool, then eventually the tool may decide not to query anything because it knows the data being accessed by the reporting tool is dashboard data because of predefined dashboards or predefined reports, and it would retrieve this information without any filtering. And speaking of filtering, there's one capability that is very important, which is not supported by global brands, by the way, and which is a key differentiator, for instance, of a solution provider that is in our portfolio here in Notec. It's not only it is applying data masking dynamically on the fly on the queries, but it can also do record hiding or column hiding. And I remember a project in Azerbaijan when I was working with Azercell, for instance. They had a team in Azercell which was dedicated to VIP accounts. So this team had special visibility about certain data that only this team could have, no one else in the organization, and they were basically dedicated resources with high trust servicing VIP accounts only. So this is, for instance, a capability that can be very handy for this kind of organizations that have, the concept of VIP or highly ultra sensitive data that you don't even want the other people in the organization to know about its existence. It's not only that you are hiding, that you are masking the records. You wouldn't realize these records exist at all. For instance, you make a select star from a table, and this table has 1 million records. The select star would retrieve only 900,000 records. Why? Because 100,000 records are hidden for particular purpose. So they are not even visible to the people. Same thing with columns. You can hide columns entirely from a query. You make a select star from a table again. It has 100 columns, but only 90 of them will be visible. And why? Because some information is completely hidden to the eye of most of the people of the organization. For instance, this feature is implemented in one of the banks in Turkey, where they are hiding HR information, salary information from the employees. So if you are, for some reason, having access to the physical layer of that HR application, and you were querying the salary table, you wouldn't see the column that is containing salary information of the employees. Why? Because that column is not only masked, it's actually hidden. Or you have VIP teams also as a use case that is VIP teams that are hiding certain records of certain accounts which have more than 2.5 million debt, or more than 2.5 million wealth. Why? Because you have special teams and dedicated account managers dealing with these kind of accounts. So the option of hiding columns or hiding records is an additional feature that can come very handy on top of the dynamic data masking. Now, dynamic data access is the next layer in this stack. And here we are also talking of a dynamic handling of queries, but you are not talking here about, it is not about masking sensitive data as you are retrieving it on the fly. It's about determining on the fly whether you should have access to certain information at all or not. And if you do, regardless of whether that information is maybe sensitive or not, let's think of certain IT departments. They are dedicated to customer care. And you have other IT departments dedicated to, or business departments dedicated to ERP topics and finance and procurement. And you don't want everyone to see everything, you know, just because they are in the same organization. So you want the people to have access to the data, and exactly access to the data as they need it to do their job. No less, of course, otherwise they cannot do their job, but also no more, because they have no business in seeing more data than the one that they need for their job. So you start creating, let's say, data zones, let's say, within your data center, which are only accessible to certain people and not accessible to others. Why is this important? Because in a large organization, such as a bank, you have a lot of churn of people. A lot of people are coming and going. A lot of people are requiring temporary access to certain data because of certain projects, for instance, especially in IT. And then you have people changing jobs within the organization. And you can imagine that in an IT environment where you have hundreds of people potentially having access to your organization, to your data in many different databases, and within these databases to many different tables, these movements are very, very difficult to track. You cannot be possibly on top of these movements as a DBA because of two reasons. One is there's too many changes. And second, as a DBA, you cannot understand which data is actually relevant to a particular position or to a particular project. Because as a DBA, you have the access to a particular database object, but you don't know what you are doing really, because the value and the purpose of people accessing certain data. And you cannot judge whether they have a legitimate reason to access these data or not. Because you are not a business user, you are basically only administrator. The people who are actually eligible and competent to decide on whether other people have a rightful access to certain data are certainly not the DBAs. They are individuals on higher level of management, or in mature organization with a good data governance, they are data owners. The data owners receive a request, let's say by a project manager or by a person newly joining a department about accessing certain database objects. And as they are receiving the request, can evaluate whether that request is rightful, whether the request is complete or incomplete or too large, and then decide on whether the request can be accepted or not. But as they are accepting the request, because they don't have super user privileges, because they are not DBAs, they have to notify the DBA and say, okay, please, can you give that grant access to those and those database object to that particular user? And the DBA can then execute. So you have a tandem here where you have the guy that is actually competent and should be accountable for managing the request. And then on the other side, you have the administrator who can fulfill the request. And you can imagine that within a very short time, there's a big mess, because the person receiving the request is not keeping track of the request. So let's say you are getting a request to access certain database objects because of an IT project, and the project finishes 6 months later, but you forget to remove the request that you granted in the first place. Or also certain people join the organization, you get the request when they join, but you don't get the notification when they leave again. Or you as a data owner, you are leaving the organization or yourself, and you're carrying with you all the knowledge of all the requests you have been granting in the past. So within a very short time, there is what I call a lot of dead bodies. And those dead bodies are user accounts of people who have long time ago maybe left the organization, or where they have access to certain data, which since a long time they are not eligible anymore, to have. These are a liability to information security because these are active accounts and they have access to data that are actually not anymore, supported by any, day-to-day need and operation. So there's an interest for organizations, especially those complex organizations such as banks with complex IT and a large workforce, to be not only clear on protecting your sensitive data and being able to mask them, for instance, by means of dynamic data masking, but also to have a closer control of who is accessing what kind of data. It doesn't matter whether that data is sensitive or not, but you should have an idea of who is accessing what data and why there is such a request to access certain data. And ideally, you should have the possibility to have it all managed by a single platform. There is a let's say a failure point in the constellation where you have a data owner who is receiving the request, validating the request, but then needs a database administrator to fulfill the request. In this there's a communication failure point there, and also there's an issue there because you have to keep track of those requests, and the database administrator will certainly not keep track of those requests because he has even less visibility. And you will be very lucky to have a data owner who is very well organized or internal communication processes to keep track of those requests and then think about revoking those requests, when time is overdue. So you need to have an application that is doing all of that at once. And this is what dynamic data access is doing. It is managing the request, allowing the request to be captured. The request is being posted to the right person who has the authority to evaluate the request and to accept the request. And as the request is being accepted, it is being fulfilled automatically without the need of a DBA to be part of the process and to do, let's say, manual fulfillment of that request. All of this is automatic. And not only all of this is automatic, but it's time effective. So you can say, I'm giving the request to those and those and those and those and those people because they made a request and the justification of the request is an IT project. And that IT project is expected to run for 6 months. After 6 months are passed, automatically the tool will revoke this access again so that you do not need to keep track and remember it 6 months later and then explicitly request the revocation of these rights. Because on database level, when you grant access to that table for the next hour, you're either granting it now and 1 hour later you have to revoke the grant, but you cannot effective date the grant. But with the help of this tool, you can effective date the grant so that you are always consistent. The implementation of your access rights is always consistent with the requests that have been posted. Nothing gets forgotten. Very important from an information security perspective, even as the data that you are controlling here are not necessarily sensitive, let's say, from a pure, nature of the data, but still you should compartment your data center and make sure that people only are accessing to the data they need, and that there is no dead bodies building up over time. And the last layer in here, the gray one, is saying, okay, fine, I do have now all my tools and controls, and I can apply secure database transaction log on the lowest level of my database and satisfy my regulations. I do have a tool that applies data masking as I'm preparing test data for my third-party contractors. I do have the ability to apply dynamic data masking on the fly on any kind of query that is being posted to a database. I can even implement my data access policies by means of dynamic data access. Fine, but the first question is, where is my sensitive data? So where in my complex IT organization in my data lake, in my BI domain, in the PCs of my employees, where in all of these distributed environments do I actually have sensitive data? And before I know this, I cannot take managerial actions to start, mitigating the exposure and applying, defining and applying certain processes and procedures to protect them. So sensitive data discovery is the beginning and the end of this journey. And what this tool is doing here, it is basically scanning your environment. Doesn't matter whether it is structured data in the database or whether it is your data lake or your file system and Hadoop systems or the PCs of your employees. It scans whatever you ask it to scan and is looking for certain patterns and certain definitions, certain data that are matching definitions of what you define to be sensitive data, and reports on its existence and location in the top-down report. So it would tell you, okay, in this database, in that schema, in that table, sensitive data of that particular type or severity or risk or category, so that you are, being informed about, an exposure and the need to take certain actions there. But not only it is actually reporting on the existence of sensitive data all around your data center, but also allows you to take actions about this, especially as it comes across, for instance, unstructured data. What could be unstructured sensitive data in the bank, for instance? It could be a contract. It could be information about a particular supplier. It could be copies of identity cards or driving licenses of your customers, which usually are part of the data that you are collecting as you are onboarding new customers. It could be anything, of course, about the customer in the structured database environment, but it is also very often in unstructured format in the form of document or pictures. So as you are discovering this kind of information and you realize there's sensitive information out there or private information, you can define policies that are immediately taking care of doing something about this data. It can label those records, those files. It can blur the information, the sensitive information inside of those pictures. Let's say, for instance, you have a copy of an ID card. It can blur the first name, last name. Just keep the ID itself, the ID number itself, or vice versa. Blur the ID number, but keep first name, blur last name, or it can remove it from where it is, or it can move it to a safe place, or it can prevent certain data from being sent out as an attachment in a mail. For instance, this is a real requirement, by the way, that is implemented in Turkcell, which is, I believe, one of the largest mobile operators in Turkey. They had a requirement to scan the PCs of the employees, and as they were scanning the PCs of the employees, if they come across sensitive data, they're not doing anything. They're not removing the data or blurring the content or do anything like that. They're just tagging the file, so that if that person was putting this file as an attachment in a mail that was leaving the organization, the email server is configured in a way that it will look for the content of this attachment and for that tag, and if the tag or prevent the mail from being sent. So you can start implementing fairly complex policies in your organization that depend on the knowledge of what you are finding in your data center is, sensitive or not. You can, for instance, have agents configured in the way that you are preventing certain data from being downloaded to your PC. Let's imagine you have your data warehouse and you make a query about 500,000 customers, your best customers, and you want to save that query on your local PC, the result of that query on your local PC. it's full of highly sensitive and highly valuable sensitive information that relate to your business. So you can, as the information goes through your clipboard, you can trigger the agent and then prevent this information or this kind of file to be stored on your PC, or blur the content as you are trying to save it. So as it goes through the clipboard, you can also trigger certain actions and have some inspection about what is going through the clipboard and report on this. So it gives you a lot of options around understanding where you have your sensitive data and then let's say helps you to sleep at night, because now you're in a position to take systematic action about from that knowledge onwards. So all in all, we have here, as you understand, for instance, 5 products, 5 solutions that are commonly available also by means of global brands, and which are taken all together, giving you quite a tight control of the operations that you are doing or that you need to do in your data center inside of your data environments, databases, but also inside of your unstructured environment, especially in the case of the sensitive data discovery, and basically help the stakeholders on the IT side to keep control about what's going on about their data, especially about the sensitive data, who has access to those data, when, how, and gives you possibilities and options to report on it, to mask the data, to prevent certain access, etc. So from the perspective of a data center, this is a very comprehensive suite that has been very successful in Turkey already. I'm talking the top 10 banks are using products from this suite.
Mesela Item Class'ın finishing yarışlarında neyse restatlamaya lazımdı. Şeyde crash'te kalmıştı. Oh, sorry, my microphone was on. So there's a lot of corporate references that can be shown here, and probably all accounts that are very well known to you, because in Azerbaijan you would probably have knowledge of these banks or telco operators or large corporations, and therefore you would have already an idea about what kind of size we are talking about. Not only that, but many of the Turkish banks, actually, maybe some of you are in fact already operating in Azerbaijan. So İş Bankası, for instance, Ziraat, our banks I already know also have branches in Azerbaijan. So that's giving the summary insight about what can be done in the data center to harden your data center, to provide built-in capabilities in your data center to harden it from the perspective of data management and security, and not as a single big bang solution, but layer by layer you can add control and you can add insight. And all of these solutions are independent of each other, with the exception of dynamic data access and dynamic data masking, which depend on each other, at least in the case of my of the vendors that I have in my portfolio. And A5 dynamic data access is a unique product for which there is no global counterpart, by the way. So you do find global counterparts for A1, A2, A4, and A6, but you would not find any global vendor that has something like dynamic data access. That's just, let's say, information on the side. It's not so important, actually. What is important is for you to see the IT roadmap in front of you, basically, to see that this is iterative work, and that this is a concern. Information security is a concern for which there's no single bullet point, single silver bullet, but you need several solutions that all together give you that control, independent of let's say, the topic of GDPR management, governance, etc. So here I'm really focused on the infrastructure-facing types of solutions. So that's it, actually. I have here the summary of these solutions again. If you gain access to the presentation, you will see this repeating what I have just been explaining. And then, yeah, I'm available anytime to you offline after this webinar. You are very welcome to get in touch with me. I can provide a lot more details. I can provide documentation, information, and advise you on a good fit or not good fit for certain requirements, etc. You see on the right side, I do not expect any commitment. There's no charges for it. Actually, this is a pure information service that I'm providing on behalf of the vendors in my portfolio. But the information service itself is for free. So you are very welcome to contact me, without any strings attached to it. I'm going to stop sharing here. You can get all of this information via ABBA and in particular through Tahmina. So I look forward to meeting you and hearing from you after this webinar. But we have still some time for some questions and answers. So please go ahead. I'm going to open my camera so you see the face behind the voice. And please feel free to raise questions. Hello. I hope you found it interesting, by the way.
By the way.
So if there's any question, please feel free to share in this community here. Otherwise, of course, we can take the questions offline as well. I'm open to contacts from you anytime.
Can I ask a question? Just
yes, please, of course.
Okay, first of all, thank you for very, very informal presentation. That was very good one. Just give lots of information about the Gdpr appliance in bank sector. And my question is like that, because you just stated there's state authorities who supervise compliance with Gdpr and other personal data protection regulations in countries. Actually, in Azerbaijan, the situation is not so clear. And how do you assess, is Gdpr directly applicable in regard of processing of personal data of the citizens of EU by Azerbaijan banks? Thank you.
I believe that this is a legal question. I can't be sure about my answer, but let's say I'm a foreigner in Turkey. So the Turkish bank would see me as a Turk. It doesn't really matter whether I am a foreigner or not. Am I eligible to open a bank account? Am I eligible to become a customer in a Turkish bank? Yes or no? If I fit certain criteria, if I submit certain documents, if I have a residence permit, blah, blah, blah, then yes, I'm eligible to open an account. From that point onwards, I am falling under the jurisdiction of the GDPR regulations for Turkey. It doesn't matter whether what is my nationality.
Okay, that was the point I would like to know. It means that we can apply the same case in the regard of the Azerbaijan banks. If EU citizen opens bank here and transmits his personal data, it means that GDPR is applicable in those cases.
Yes, yes. It's
so
GDPR. The GDPR is it's protecting the privacy of data of your customers. It doesn't say of your Turkish customers or of your Belgian customers or Azeri customers. It doesn't matter. It's private data.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for clarification.
Yeah, you're welcome. But that's, by the way, this is a legal topic, and don't take this as my last word. Don't take my last word as the last one for you to implement your policies. But this would be my answer to to your question without being a legal expert. Is there any question related to the general, let's say, the IT side? And for instance, what I can share together with the slides to Tahmina is interoperability view. So some of the vendors, let's say, because all of it is data center related, so data center and especially databases have many different vendors. You may be interested in knowing which of those solutions work with which kind of database. So is it Oracle? Does it support Oracle? Does it not support Oracle? How about IBM, SQL Server, etc.? In Europe, this is a little bit complicated story because Europeans' IT infrastructure is very old in many cases, so they have very special types of RDBMS. Some of them even have a mainframe still. But the more you go east, the more the infrastructure is a standard one based on either IBM or Oracle or Microsoft, which is making things easier in terms of interoperability. But I will eventually share with Tahmina a slide that is describing the interoperability, at least in my portfolio. But of course, this is a question that you would have to raise to global brands as well if you were interested in the global brands. Like, which system are they supporting? Any other question? Then, if not, we can slowly but surely close the call. Tahmina will share the slide deck with you, and yeah, the slide deck will, in principle, include all the slides that you have seen in today's presentation. But I will add as well the one related to the interoperability of the solutions that we are talking about. As I mentioned, if we are considering the vendors that are in my portfolio, then there's a very strong customer base in the form of most of the large accounts for the finance industry, meaning the top 10 banks, already large insurance companies are already customers. And also the telcos are also all customers of these solutions here. Why? Because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, these solutions are technology-wise totally peer-to-peer with global brands, but support-wise and price-wise, they are far more attractive. And that's the thing to look at it, is total cost of ownership, and especially for investments that are for which there's no immediate business case. You know, we mentioned at the very beginning, information security is actually a cost center, if you like, because you are spending resources and spending a budget on securing sensitive data in your business, but this is invisible to the business. You're not going to grow your business just because you have secured your sensitive data. It's just preventing, let's say, the accident and the reputational damage or regulatory damage once there is a breach. So this is a preventive initiative, but in my opinion, extremely important for large organizations, especially, of course, for in regulated industries such as financial services. That's eventually my two words, my two lines. We can close here. Tahmina, I give it back to you. I thank everyone for joining. It was a rich attendance. I'm happy to see so many names, and I hope it was interesting and especially useful to you, and look forward to hearing from you again. Tahmina, up to you.
Thanks again for a very interesting presentation and webinar. As you mentioned, we'll send the presentation and the recording of webinar to everyone. Thanks, Mr. Emanuel.
You're welcome. Take care. İyi çalışmalar herkese. İyi akşamlar.
Çok sağ olun, çok sağ olun.
Teşekkürler.
Teşekkürler.
Bye bye.
Çok sağ olun. Teşekkürler. Sağ olun.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.